Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. We're making education your business here at the MSCHE Annual Conference in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Oh, my goodness. Thank you to our sponsor, Lead Squared, for making it possible for us to be here. And no, this is not your typical episode of the EdUp Experience podcast. It is not. In fact, this is a special edition episode of EdUp Legal. And by my side, in person, ladies and gentlemen, the host of EdUp Legal, here she is. Her name is Deborah Solmore. And I just introduced her, but I'll do it again. The host of EdUp Legal, Deborah. Welcome to the EdUp microphone. How are you, Deborah?
I'm doing great, Joe. It's great to be here.
Remember, we're going to talk right in the middle of that.
Right in the middle.
Right in the middle
there
of the.
You go.
Right
okay,
in the middle
Joe, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
That's right. We all get the conference jitters. It's our first recording. There's only 2,000 people or so watching you record right now. This special episode of EdUp Legal with our guest. She's your guest today. Ladies and gentlemen, here she is. Her name is Tracey Schneider, and she is the General Counsel at MSCHE. Tracey, welcome to the EdUp Legal microphone.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Deborah.
It's great to have you here.
Okay, so all I'm going to do, I've introed you guys, and although with my vast knowledge, I could dominate this episode with my legal, frankly, my legal expertise. I'm going to step back because I don't, I'm just going to step back.
We don't get to ask you questions?
Well, I feel like that, I'm not sure that would go too well. Let's be quite honest here. It would not go too well. So I'm going to step back, and Deborah, I'm going to hand it over to you to take it to EdUp Legal. Go.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And I'm with you, Tracey. I think we should ask him a few questions at some point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks for joining us. I have to tell you that, first of all, it's a treat being here. I'm so excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this for weeks. But to have you as the first person I'm talking to, I have so many questions I think our audience will be interested in, but I'm especially interested in. So as the general counsel at the accreditor, I think people will wonder, what is it that you do? We don't generally, well, I do, but people just generally don't run into the general counsel when they're dealing with their accreditor. So give us some overview of what do you do at MSCHE?
Absolutely. Well, first, thanks for having me here. Appreciate it. I would say that very technically, my title is a little bit longer than just general counsel, but it does give a little bit of a highlight of what I do for the commission. I'm technically the senior vice president for legal affairs and general counsel. So you're telling me I got it wrong, is what that's the only contribution I made was a mistake. We just don't like to use too many words sometimes. And the only time as lawyers we don't like to use too many words. But it does highlight what I do with the commission and for the commission and with our institutions. So the senior vice president for legal affairs part of my job is a little bit more on the accreditation side. That's where we work with institutions. I do a lot of the legal reviews for the complex substantive changes. So as institutions are merging, acquiring, transforming in different ways, I will review usually the parts of the legal agreement that come through, the issues that may come up as it relates to our policies and procedures. I work with our senior vice president for policy and administrative services, and she and I will look into some of the unique transactions that are coming before the commission. So on the accreditation side, I also look at the new institutions who are seeking to become and join our membership, and we call those the applicant and candidate institutions. And they also have questions of governance sometimes that come up in their reviews. And so I'll do some reviews and answer questions that come up on the accreditation side. If there's new legislative initiatives, both at the state level and, of course, with the United States Department of Education, then I'll try to review those and provide some resources, hopefully helpful resources that support our advocacy initiatives. And so on the accreditation side, that's what I do. And then
So you basically sit around doing nothing all day?
Nothing.
Yeah,
That's
nothing.
I have a lot of free time. I wait for things to come in. And so I just hope that one day I'll get a legal issue to talk about.
Don't tell our secret. Don't tell everyone that's what we
I'm
do
so
all day.
sorry. No, I can talk about other things too on the commission side. That's the general counsel part of my job, and I represent the commission on I will say all of the legal issues that we deal with in-house. So I will join the commission meetings and I will provide them with legal advice at the commission meetings. I attend all of our committee meetings. So as legal issues come up, as the committees of the commission and the commission are reviewing the institutional matters, I provide them with legal advice. And certainly I provide our president and the rest of the senior leadership team and our staff with legal advice on any, I'll call them the corporate and nonprofit matters that come up. And that's the general counsel part of my job.
And how long have you been at the commission?
So I'm just shy of 2 years now.
And can I ask where you came from? Did you come from a higher ed background? I can,
a little bit. You can ask. A little bit, and I was also in K-12. So I represented school districts throughout the state of New Jersey, and I did that for probably 10 to 15 years or so. And I went back to school and got my PhD in educational policy planning and leadership. And so I worked with K-12 and higher education institutions before I came to the commission.
So can you tell us a little bit, what are some of the, I guess, unique transactions that you're seeing now? It's such a difficult time in higher ed, and there's so many things that are happening that I think like maybe 10 years ago you wouldn't see happening. And so I'm just curious.
That was my exact question. What is a unique transaction?
Oh. It's not a legal term. We can say that.
We can say transaction. We don't have
like it is.
I am going to start to use legal terms, though, because I don't know if I can describe the transactions without using legal terms. But I will say this. I think there are a lot that most people are familiar with. And so we do see a lot of mergers. We see a lot of acquisitions. I think most people are fairly familiar with what those are. But I think the important thing is we also see a variety of other types of transactions that maybe don't have a specific definition, or at least not a traditional legal definition.
Do you ever see something that you look at on its face and think this?
I don't think so.
All the time.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
but then we find
those.
a way to make it work. So the important thing at the commission is that we don't try to change institutional transactions. What we do is we take the transaction that they bring before us and we try to analyze it in accordance with our definitions. Now, our definitions don't always align with those of state regulators or the United States Department of Education. So a lot of it is about understanding the intricacies of the transaction and some of the political issues that come up with the transaction. Sometimes it's really important for institutions to use a particular term for their transaction, one that doesn't suggest something overly legal.
So it's more like this is what you're saying.
I like your plan, except it sucks. So let me do the plan, and that way it might be really good.
Yes, but they don't actually let me say that.
Okay, I'll stop now, Deborah. Go.
No, that's okay. So building on that, I have two thoughts. One, I'd like to do a little bit of a public service announcement when you say, "Oh, I'm going to use legal terms." I have found that more often than not, those legal terms don't mean to people what they mean to us. So, for example, let's talk about a merger for just a second, right? I think this is a good topic. I think that sometimes people don't understand merger is you cease to exist and one becomes the other, where they think, oh, merging, I'm going to buy all the assets, I'm going to get all the good stuff, I'm going to leave all the challenging stuff behind. No, not in a merger. So
you have accepted the truth.
Sometimes we have to. So merger is really, for us, we actually define those with very specific examples. So we try also at the commission to recognize that not everyone, especially when we're working with institutions, whether it is a president or CEO of an institution or the accreditation liaison officer, they're not always familiar with the legal transaction. And that's not the heart of what we're reviewing. It's really kind of the initial question of what we look at, but it isn't the heart of what we're reviewing. We're looking at the substance of the transaction, not just, what you call it, not just, what the United States Department of Education would call it, not what a state regulator would call it. We look at what's really happening in the transaction, what's happening at the institution, what's happening for students, what's happening to students, what's happening to programs, and that's really what we're looking at. We do have to put it into categories because those categories do help us track different critical components of the transaction, critical timelines, but we really do try to look at it more holistically and more in its substance and not just in its form. So while we do have to define it, you're absolutely correct. We don't look at it in terms of those traditional legal terms. So what somebody says to me is, oh, we're merging. Or, sometimes people will say we're combining. It's a combination. And then
Really?
That's fine. It's a combination. And then we take a look at and what does that
Wink,
mean
wink.
to us, right? We're just combining. We're still going to exist.
So the other thing that's interesting to me in what you were saying is that the department, the state, the accreditor don't always see the same transactions the same way. So I've been in my practice, I've had the experience of one might say you need approval because it's X, whereas the other one's like you don't need approval because it's X.
Right.
Surprise.
And so that I think is very difficult. And just building on that, I am sure that you have transactions that come before you that may or may not have legal representation, or if they do, sometimes they don't have legal representation by someone who has a higher ed background.
Right.
So that's challenging. So how do you deal with those challenges?
So I think we do a few different things which can be really helpful for institutions, though sometimes it just seems like another step in the process. But we actually have a preliminary review before they do their complex substantive change and come and seek approval. And the preliminary review gives us the opportunity to answer those kinds of questions. We take a look at it, we see what's really happening in the transaction, and if it's not something that we would consider a complex substantive change, we put that in writing and we explain why. And in those scenarios, we find that's been really effective for institutions who think they're going through a certain process with us, but maybe they have to do that with the United States Department of Education. But for us, we don't need to approve it in the same way. And so that preliminary review, while for some it seems like just an extra step, it actually is a really critical component in the process and the way that we hope to be able to help institutions be able to navigate some of those questions of whether or not they need approval. I think one of the other things I hope that we do, and I hope that my position signals, is when Dr. Perfetti, our president, hired me, that was one of the things that she hoped to accomplish, is to have somebody with the legal background, besides herself, of course, within the organization, and Joe. We regularly
That's a fact.
call Joe.
That's a fact.
We call Joe when we have the really complex legal questions. We reach out to him for his advice.
I think you and I need to take over the buttons.
I think we do.
Do I look like I know what a JPEG is?
Sorry.
You need one with some legal terminology.
I
We're gonna have to
all
record
sorts
some
of.
more
Don't worry.
tonight.
You're going to get what you asked for. I promise.
I have no doubt that I will. So I think one of the other things that my position hopefully has done is also serve as a resource for counsel at institutions who have questions or maybe are looking at it solely as a legal transaction. And so they're thinking of it in a very particular way. And I think sometimes just having a conversation that lets them know that the commission looks at it more holistically and not just legal, it's just one aspect of the process for us.
How do you, if you don't mind, Deborah, let me ask one question.
No, I do not mind.
Cycles are really hard to understand, right? If you're going through a merger, acquisition, there's, you might have bondholders, you have banks, you have stocks, depending if it's a for-profit and nonprofit. There's tax, there's the IRS, and then there's the accreditor timeline. And I think there's an expectation sometimes for the institution that goes, oh, we need this right now.
Oh, yes.
You got to approve this right now, or else it's just not going to work.
The expedited request. We call
Right.
it.
Yes, that very kind way of saying so. Align expectations in reality for those listening right now that come really to a creditor, any accreditor, and say, hey, this came in front of us. We need to merge now, or whatever merge means or acquisition means, right? Because it could be an asset acquisition. It could be programs. It could be anything, land, whatever. But I need you to do this right now. Isn't it easy? Can't you just do this for me? I mean, align the expectations in reality.
Reality. So the official response is that it can take a complex substantive change for the commission can take up to a year to approve. That is our official response. With that said, We do work with institutions when they have a particular time frame, because we recognize there are a lot of components in the process. So we do work with institutions when we have a particular time frame, and we continue to look at the process to see. We don't ever want to be holding up an institution's process, but we do want to make sure that we do set those realistic expectations for institutions who maybe haven't had that conversation with their lawyer to talk about all the different constituents who may be involved in the legal parts of the transaction. And we hope that they have had those conversations, but if they haven't, we do try to align those expectations and let people know it can take up to a year. But we also work really hard at trying to honor the timelines that they have, recognizing that for some institutions, it's either this transaction goes through successfully or they close. And so we want them to choose their future and not be the ones that are holding that up or standing in the way. With that said, there's also other regulators who need to approve it, and they often look to the commission first.
I was going to say, in a nod to Joe and his sound effects, I would say I always felt like one of my roles was to herd the cats and slow the roll, because the transaction would take on a life of its own, and all the business people and all the educators would say, we're going to do this and this is what we're going to do. And then I would have to do the chart that says you need the accreditor, we need the state. In some cases, we were a nonprofit, you needed the state AG. So there were all these constituents that you had to go to. And I think at the end, people would actually be grateful that the Department of Education doesn't actually, quote unquote, improve your transaction until after it closes.
Right.
So it's like, well, we can get as far as we can get, and then we'll wait for the Department of Ed. So in their review, your year sounds very, very, very quick.
I will agree, and I'm going to play this back for institutions when we're having that conversation. See, other people realize how quick the year is.
Yes. And I guess, there's a lot to be done. So one question I have, I think I know the answer, and maybe it depends on the accreditor, but I'll ask it anyway, which is, do you spend most of your time sort of behind the scenes, really guiding and advising sort of, the liaisons and the staff, and as opposed to being forward facing with counsel for the institutions, either inside counsel or outside counsel?
You are absolutely correct. I try to stay as behind the scenes as sometimes they let me, although I will tell you that every once in a while I get invited on a podcast and I get to come into the forefront for just a minute. But otherwise, I do try to stay behind the scenes because, as you know, Deborah, my role is as an advisor. We don't actually, and there's a reason why we don't have counsel for institutions come directly to me. We always redirect those conversations through the ALO, through our vice president liaisons. And then if they need to bring us in and have have the legal counsel in the meeting, we'll certainly do that. But we don't ever want the transactions to become, or the discussions to become, purely legal discussions. They aren't. They never will be in higher ed. We're just one component of it. But sometimes it is good to get on a call with all counsel just so everyone's on the same page. But we always do that through our ALOs and our vice president liaisons so that really it stays focused on the institution as a whole, and more importantly, students, than it is sort of the legal components of the transaction.
And I would say, in a nod to outside counsel that I've worked with over the years who understand all of that, it's really great to have someone who understands sort of the lay of that landscape, as opposed to some outside lawyer who's like, I'm just going to pick up the phone and call the general counsel and they're going to help me. And where you have the other one saying, no, you're not. That's not the way it works. That's not going to get you to where you need to be.
And we see the same lawyers in different transactions. So we do know that they start to understand the process. They understand, why it's important for us to have the vice president liaisons and the ALOs in the discussion. And so we do. It's a small community. And despite the fact that we accredit institutions in many states and internationally, it is a small community of higher education lawyers.
And I would say I've done a lot of government investigation work, and one of the things that has been taught to me by my outside counsel, which I sort of respect, is respect the process, and that you're not going to get where you need to go by thinking that you're more important than you really are in terms of working with the people assigned to you.
Absolutely true.
I hear that.
I'm sorry.
Don't let me disrupt you.
I was just going to say, Joe's throwing me off with all his sound effects. The department has been extremely active in the last, couple of years of this administration. There's a new rulemaking package coming out. It's great fodder for my podcast. I have lots of people who want to come on and talk about all these. No doubt. So that's
EdUp
good.
Legal.
That's good. Thank you. That's good for me. But one of the areas I think that has really got a lot of attention is sort of this, nonprofit conversions. So are you seeing a lot of attempts for-profits to convert, or is that not one of the ones that's been high on your radar screen? I know it varies where in the country you're sort of located.
So we have had a couple that were finishing up, I would say, when I first joined the commission. Since that time, I have not seen very many personally. I will say that there are some that are often in the plans as part of another transaction. So, institutions are coming together. One may be a nonprofit, one may be a for-profit. So over time, it's possible that that's going to be part of the long-term plan.
It's fuzzy math.
But in terms of the short-term transaction, I'll say short-term, knowing it probably isn't that short, but shorter term, we haven't actually seen that many. And I will say probably because they're difficult. They get a lot of scrutiny and they take some time. And the department continues to follow up on those types of transactions. And because we are the Title IV gatekeepers, we also follow up on those transactions. So as the department, then as they move through our process, and then the department asks some questions, asks for some additional information, we also do that to align with making sure we're continuing to monitor what's going back to the department. So we actually haven't seen that many. We have seen a lot of complex substantive change, but not in the context of conversions, at least not in the past few years.
I think maybe the last sort of topic I'll shift to is it's been a couple of years since the department came out with, and I don't know what the appropriate way to say it is, this idea that there are accreditors, there aren't regional accreditors, and there aren't national accreditors, and you can change accreditors. And have you been seeing sort of any of your institutions leaving for other accreditors, or institutions wanting to be MSCHE accredited and leaving their accreditors? Because that always sort of fascinated me, that you had this idea that it was really regional and it worked. And then it was all up for grabs. And coming from a system where we had schools that were accredited by different accreditors, I've just really been sort of fascinated by how this is playing out.
So the whole process, it's also quite fascinating to me. So when I joined, the commission had already made a determination to remove those regional boundaries. So each of the accreditors had a choice when the time came if they wanted to expand outside of their traditional regional boundaries. And our commission, MSCHE, made a choice very early on to remove the regional boundaries and to welcome institutions all across the country. And I think what it has done is it has allowed all accreditors to really look at their processes to determine how far they intend for their reach to be. And I think we have seen institutions who are choosing to go and expand to a different accreditor. And we also are seeing institutions coming to us. A number of institutions over the past several years since that determination was made have made that choice. What's interesting is how it continues to be regulated by the department. And certainly not taking a position on that one way or the other, but simply saying that the department does still look closely at that review process, whether or not an institution has reasonable cause to move to a different accreditor. And I think the underlying goal is simply so you're not, choosing an accreditor for lower standards, and that is not what we've been seeing. We certainly don't see anyone seeking to leave or seeking to join for a lower standard or a different standard of any kind. It's just whether or not it's a better fit for that institution for a variety of reasons. And so we do welcome those institutions, and we have for quite some time welcomed institutions internationally. So that's another component of it that's of interest to us for our membership initiative, is just to make sure those standards, institutions who seek to align with our standards, and make sure those institutions are meeting the standards for the benefit of students. So we have seen some come and we have seen some go, and we expect that that's going to continue over the years. And we welcome institutions who want to join and align with our processes.
Well, Tracey, this has been fabulous. I want to thank you for coming on and talking to us. And the best thing about being live, sitting actually across the table from you, is that once we stop recording, I just have 10 more questions I'm just going to ask you for the fun of it.
That sounds great. We can talk forever.
Meditation.
But are we still going to have sound effects when we have our own
You're going to
conversation?
have to make your own sound effects with each other.
All right. We'll have to try.
Well, thank you. This has been entertaining. I have to tell you, when I record from home, I don't have any sound effects, and I don't have Joe sitting next to me. So this has really just been a treat. So thank you, Joe.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a special edition episode of EdUp Legal with your host, Deborah Solmore. She is amazing. She's here sitting next to me. We met for the first time today. And our guest today, no, she is your guest today. Here she is, Tracey Schneider. She is GC with MSCHE and more. GC and more. And I can't repeat all the stuff she said. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just, what do we say? Do your outro.
Making legal easy. Leave out the legalese. And you did it.
Oh,
You
I
were
like
great.
that.
That's my tagline.
I only had to use a little bit.
No. You were fabulous. I am hoping that I can get people to be interested in legal, regulatory, and compliance for higher education without having to be lawyers to understand it. So,
I agree 100%, and I thank you both so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You know where to find up EdUp Legal. Just look on every podcast station you find. Just find it. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just EdUp'd.